Hi everyone, my name's Andrew from AMT Equestrian, and it's not very often you get such an opportunity to have two amazing, insightful, beautifully intelligent, beautiful people as the two people with me here today. So thank you, Sharon May-Davis and Belinda Bolsenbroek. Thank you both for joining me. This is very much an impromptu chat. We're essentially just going to have a chat about the things that we've been going through over the last few days. We're halfway through our second dissection here in Western Australia, and yeah, there's a number of things that come out, and we just thought we'd get that opportunity to get these two together and have a bit of a chat and film it. So thank you both for joining me.
No, thank you.
You're most welcome.
Yeah, so I might like to start. And one of the things I thought we'd talk about quickly was, we've got these two horses. One of them is a little German riding pony that was an ECVM horse, and Sharon, I guess you to talk about the fact that these horses are getting to no greater than 10 years of age before they're ending up on the table. How does it get to there? What happens?
Yeah, basically to get to that point, the owners have gone through every avenue they can to sustain the horse's quality of life, and at a point where it becomes potentially behaviourally dangerous, random blind behaviour, such as blind spooks and so forth. So riders get injured, and the horses seem to be getting down another path that they can't manage in the paddock themselves, so they fall over. So unfortunately, a lot of these horses end up on the table as a result of previous injuries or consistent injuries, or actually being dangerous to go into the paddock with because of random behaviour. So it's very sad to see such an average of horses decreasing from 11 to 10 over a period of the years that I've been investigating this malformation.
Yeah. It's something that for us, we were chatting, Belinda and I, before about the fact that that's the end of the road for those horses. But the fact of the matter is that, there's the genetics, the breeding side of things, there's the handling, there's the husbandry and so forth, there's the training and the work that they're doing with these horses. Belinda, you feel that there's something we can be doing more of or doing less of?
I think it's an overall knowledge that we need to acquire of keeping the animal, like animal husbandry. I think in the case of the horses that, like you're discussing the pony that I didn't see, but that it's ECVM2, that is something genetically that as breeders, obviously, we need to look at what is going on and what should we change to have a functional animal to have a high quality of life. That's not something that we can do to a certain extent as in taken on as a rider, because to the point where they get serious spinal compression or that sort of spinal cord compression, I should say, it's not something that you can help anymore by riding. So it should be just looked at from the perspective of helping the horse. At that moment, it's not so important to be on the horse. It's what we can do off the horse to make the life more comfortable. When it comes to the point where Sharon sees these horses, I have seen that there's so many layers of damage in these horses from just not having the knowledge of what's really going on. So obviously we still need to, bring so much of that knowledge forward. And also just in the animals keeping and in the training approaches. The idea that a horse would say no because it's naughty or that it doesn't want to do something is very, very outdated. That is one really important topic to discuss. If a horse reacts, there is a reason for it. They are extremely submissive by nature. Yeah. So they will always try and please.
And I certainly have to agree with that, because I was certainly concerned recently, and this was only 2 years ago, when we had a 4.5-year-old stock horse on the table, gorgeous sweet mare momentarily, and then all of a sudden out of the blue her behavior was so random, and she had two cerebellum tumors on the brain.
Right.
So there's so many other things. So 1 minute she was sweet to ride, and the next minute she was going to bite you and attack you, and she'd attack you in the paddock, but the next minute she was sweet in the paddock. So the two tumors were just caught us out of the blue.
And how many people that are not going through those things might not be tumors, might just even just be sciatic nerve impingement of the
Absolutely.
hind end that actually causes these horses to all of a sudden buck or bolt or fall through a hind end, and that hasn't picked its feet up. So they go to the trainer and they say, well, like, we should put it over some cavalletti, it needs to work a little bit harder, whereas usually we need to look a little deeper than that, or than just to think get on and ride and flog it forward, or or butte it up. That's not a very good idea either. So I think looking at training approaches, that is very important, and that's where it starts on the ground. That starts
listening
on the
to your
ground.
horse.
Listening to your horse starts.
Awareness is the greatest agent for change. Is one of AMT's logos, or it's on our front sign.
Yeah.
And, it's neck up Tolly line, but to us, that's what this is all about for us. Is
absolutely.
sharing that awareness and making people, educate themselves and be aware of the fact that the consequences of what they do or don't do. And how significant those can be for horses. Sharon, one of the things I wanted to kind of ask you, the percentages of these horses with this ECVM, there's a lot,
it's really quite concerning. Here in Australia alone, we have it at 40%. When we look at the global statistics of the research they've been conducting, it's remained at around 40% as well. But what's become more alarming in recent times, and unfortunately I predicted this and it's come to fruition, is that I said anything with thoroughbred in the back line is likely to going to have ECVM. So we now have warm bloods at 30% globally. We have quarter horses at 16%. We have standard breds at 40%, Australian stock horses at 40%. And we're not dissecting small numbers, we're dissecting significant numbers to write papers and scientifically record it. And then a lot of other researchers are going back through their radiographs retrospectively and coming up with the same figures.
Which is really important, isn't it, Sharon? Like, I actually feel that what I would tell all of my students before they purchase a horse now, no matter what the breed is, get caudal neck images done. And then there's a place that I believe that is set up by you or some of your veterinarians that you work with, that you register the horses that are...
That's over in Holland, the Netherlands.
Yes.
And that's with Equine Studies, and they're registering these horses, and they've got a global hits all around the world.
I think that's important,
horses.
right? To actually...
a database of the breed and the bloodlines behind those breeds.
Yes, exactly right, because there's only so much that obviously you can also see on the table, whereas we sort of, we need to have a really wide base of horses to actually be able to go into the right direction of where to go.
So one of the things I wanted to kind of flesh out was this 40% or so of these horses. What does the future look like? How do we address this problem?
Well, in the Holstein cattle industry, when they had a similar issue in the cervicothoracic junction, they bred it out within 10 years. It was that quick for them because it impacted upon their income, because the dairy cattle were delivering stillborn calves. Therefore, there was no future in the calves for producing milk. And so they had it out of the system, out of the genetics, totally out of the whole breeding program, including, of course, the end production line, within 10 years. So it's doable.
But we can't do that yet because you don't know exactly where.
They're developing genetic tests as we speak.
Okay. Yeah, because that is something that, I've been a breeder, and I know that I stopped breeding completely because I would not want to breed another horse until I actually know what would be the safe direction. And that's a great concern
because we've had 2 normal adults produce an ECVM foal.
Yes, exactly right. That's correct.
So it's very likely.
So 2 recessives.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's likely to be homozygous recessive. We haven't got that proof yet.
Yeah.
But this is of concern.
But so, in the past you've spoken about the markers, the measurements of the feet, and the. Do you want to quickly go through some of those?
What happened was this actually started off in the Netherlands as well, and I ended up because we had a number of ECVM horses on the table due to the veterinarian diagnosing it and putting on the table for us to see the extent of the malformation. So we were looking at bifurcation. So the ventral scalene was malformed. The longus coli was malformed. The first ribs were malformed. So it became the neural pathways were malformed. So we ended up having these idiosyncrasies of one side as opposed to bilateral, so unilateral to bilateral. And I noticed that the frogs were smaller on the unilateral sides. And this came to fruition that when I went to Sweden, that the horse was presented to us that had to be put down, and it was the Swedish trotter, and he moved and behaved as if it was left-sided ECVM. but his frog measurements said he was right-sided ECVM. And so what happened was that when he was put on the table, he'd had injections with an anaphylactic reaction in the left side of the neck that had gone down and encapsulated the majority of the left-hand side on the dorsal aspect of the last two cervical vertebrae, which then, of course, impacted upon, you could see these sinus tracts going down, of course, the drainage process going down and around this. So he's protective of his caudal cervical vertebra on the left side. But he was right side ECVM, matching the frog. So we began to make these measurements and we found these correlations. It doesn't always work. There are other factors such as stumbling in front, having this sometimes this hover of where the horse is just momentarily hovering before it puts its foot down, as if it's not quite sure where it's going. But the greatest concern is that we've noticed a lot of these horses do stumble in front. Some of them, as they get older, so as they get progressively older, they get progressively worse in a lot of instances, and they have what we call blind bolts. And as a result of that, the rider is injured, broken necks, broken pelvises, and so forth.
It's got to stop that, consequences. To me, one of those things you've kind of spoken about is, yes, we're going to try and remove them from the gene pool.
I'd like to think we could, but at this point, it's only a matter of even just finding the tools to recognise it in the gene pool.
Or creating an awareness is a need too,
and it's
you can't have a solution without a problem. People got to recognise it as a
Also for a wider variety of breeds too, because did you not also find ECVM in Andalusian?
I'm not aware of Andalusian.
Okay, I thought somebody actually said
it's Frisians.
No,
it's not been me.
Frisian?
Yeah, Frisian.
Arab.
It's in Arabs,
That's why Frisian, because Frisian has Arab influence.
I understood.
Because Frisian doesn't have thoroughbred influence.
I was understanding that the comment with regards to the illusion was more about them missing lamella.
Yes,
sorry. Yeah, right. Yeah, but we knew that already.
Yeah.
That's not a.
Again, with a neck that big, and if they had lamella, they'd be impossible to take.
But I think that comes back to your training with what you're saying. If you're working on the ground and you've got a partnership that's developed, they'll work for you. Absolutely. You said they were a submissive. I totally agree. They are wanting to give to you.
Absolutely, 100%.
And why?
Every single horse is born like with that submissive nature, and the spirit to want to connect to a human. We've been breeding them for that long in our partnership that they actually, the whole fact of starting horses, I think that's one of those things, like people thinking about starting horses, it's a huge concept in their mind, and it could be, like a dangerous idea to sit on the back of the horse. The horse doesn't care at all about that part. It's the whole thing leading up to it. If you haven't taught your horse to actually nicely lead on a halter and be comfortable with that, or even just at liberty to be able to want, the horse doesn't come running up to you in the paddock when you call it. When it sees you, something's going on.
We're very anti these cowboy competitions where they make how quickly can they get this done, and the amount of stress and pressure that they put these animals through.
Absolutely.
And the bucking and all these things, and just say, oh, that's normal. It's like, no, it should not be normal. It's not acceptable.
It's like part of the rehabilitation training. I think that that's what I what I do, but that is because every single person that comes to me has a rehab horse. Even if it's a horse that's not started yet, 9 out of 10 somewhere in the process of upbringing or in a lack of nutrition in utero, there's some development that actually causes this horse to have imbalances, and from those imbalances, usually through poor upbringing, putting horses, separating them from their mothers without actually thinking about how this would be done without a traumatic experience, putting them, as in a boy taking the testicles away at the same time, and then chucking them in a field with other youngsters that are lost and don't know where to go, or being put in a paddock with a broken race thoroughbred that's so compromised it doesn't have any normal reactions anymore, or a horse with ECVM doesn't actually respond normally, and then therefore this youngster already comes up with issues, like it will already have some divots in the chest that will look just like a divot, but when you start training it, that this is not just a divot, this will actually affect its capacity to carry a human being. And
this is the thing that interests me in this discussion, because when we talk about malpositioning in utero and nutritional in utero. The birth canal is, of course, an issue with horses in domestication where we assist them and so forth. And then we have these other issues associated with birth canal trauma that I don't find in the wild horse because they've rebalanced themselves in a natural environment.
That's right. Yeah.
And so that's what I find really interesting from that perspective. The most perfectionist horses I've ever encountered were the Konigs on the table and the Przewalskis.
Yeah.
That really, really caught me off guard.
We had an
How
amazing discussion about that, like with the browsing, the idea for browsing, and that we should really implement that into
because I've dissected 16-month-olds, and I actually had to do a two-day-old, but that's not significant to the research. The 16-month-old and the 2-year-old and the 3-year-olds were. So I found them so symmetrical, so wonderfully symmetrical in the way they masticated, in the way they grazed, which really caught me off guard because they hoover. They don't stop and postulate and then move on and then postulate again. They don't. They keep moving with their head down. So they're like a Hoover vacuum cleaner, just moving consistently and eating at the same time because it's inefficient to lift your head.
Yeah.
But yet we have our horses postulating because we put the feed in one position on the ground.
And breeding them in different measurements, I suppose, too. That makes a huge change.
So many other aspects involved. I mean, it catches me off guard time and time again when I go in the wild and have to watch a herd that unfortunately has to be culled down. And then when they ask you to make the decisions of which ones to cull, it's like, don't ask me. I'm not going to cull perfection.
With the Konigs.
Sometimes it's really hard.
Yeah, that is so difficult. Yeah.
So do these horses under saddle perform? I've watched them on videos perform in Poland. Pretty exciting because when they were going through the forest, which I really liked, the other horses in the endurance rides were going around obstacles, not the Konigs.
Yeah.
The Konigs, they just let them have a free rein and let them go, and they just went over everything as if it was not an issue. And it really surprised me to watch them under saddle because they came down the field watching everybody else, and people were trying to meander their horses around. Not the Konigs. They were comfortable in an open environment as they were as an forest environment, and the rider doing nothing on board, letting them go.
Trying to hang on in balance.
I found that amazing to observe.
So like common riding issues that we're seeing, so compression or, arthritic changes in the base of the necks, the shoulders, the elbows, etc.
Let's not forget to mention elbows.
Or the lumbers and those areas. You know, you were talking about the fact that they've got lamellar connection, they haven't got the ECVM or any evidence of that. But as ridden horses, is there any issues like, do they have any of the typical issues that you see from the riding? So
I haven't dissected a ridden Konig. What I have had the honour to dissect and observe is going around museums around a lot of places in the world and looking for, because the relationship is supposedly height at the wither and age for osteoarthritis in the caudal neck. There's supposed to be a relationship between those two and the increase in cervical vertebra osteoarthritis. So as we know that the cervical vertebra basically close at 6-7 years of age. So going around the world and looking at these pre-domesticated horses, I have not got ECVM in the 1,500 to 2,000 I've looked at. Not in any. 1,500 to 2,000, not one ECVM. Perfect symmetry. Symmetry in the enthesis patterns of the way the muscles attach. Symmetry in the way the muscles and the transverse processes are symmetrical left and right. So there's none of this left and right as if they've had some kind of birth canal trauma. The other area that I found really fascinating is that they have less cervical vertebra osteoarthritis than horses at the age of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10.
Always less. There's
way less. So when we're looking at horses in the modern domestic horses that we're riding, we're seeing osteoarthritis in severity between 80 and 90% of the horses we're riding. Different severities from 0 to 3, but mostly 1 to 3 is what we're going to see in all ridden horses. The interesting thing from my perspective is looking at all of this osteoarthritis in the pre-domesticated horse. We're talking 80% for ridden. These aged horses that I got to look at, at 30% of the lesser variety of osteoarthritis, normal aging osteoarthritis of 1 out of 3.
Wow.
Whereas the domestic horses, a lot of them are 3 out of 3 with severity of osteoarthritis.
Did you look at any of the of the horses that have been ridden, like that you see in the museum. Like there's a lot of horses that are like also preserved of riders, like some famous people. If you had a chance to look at any of
I actually got to look at a medieval horse that was a horse out of the Netherlands. Yes, I got to see a few. The thing that became the biggest difference was that I had to organise research to justify whether we had nuchal ligament lamella on ancient horses or not.
Sure.
Yeah. So this became really interesting. I was able to prove that the nuchal ligament lamella was there and large and functional in the caudal cervical vertebra in pre-domesticated horse, and most medieval horses.
Wow.
And they didn't have the same amount of osteoarthritis in the caudal cervical vertebra.
So it tells you then that what they were doing historically trained for longevity. Yeah? So
they had the nuchal ligament lamella,
and they were still attached.
Yeah.
Also, but a whole different way of keeping horses, and at the time also a whole different way of breeding horses. They were still using natural selection of breeding for the time. The only thing that they would do is sometimes take one of the most successful stallions and bring them to these areas where they would keep the herds that were roaming in freedom in the wild, and then they would let the stallion breed with the mares. But otherwise these horses were still living like they're living a wild life. They would only choose
like how they're mostly doing in Spain and Portugal.
Still a little bit like, I mean, there's still some of the feral horses that are kept that way. Like Italy does the same thing. Like in Italy, in the mountains, like some of the mountain ranges, they still do the same thing. They're semi-wild, like feral horses, and they pick the best. And like for riding, that they see for riding.
That may be a bit of a glimpse of the future of where things need to go for.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's why I'm very keen to see the Akaltiki.
Yeah.
Yeah, the horse tomorrow.
Because they're doing, because of the methodology that I was talking about earlier and having to organise how we research. We worked out the methodology on ultrasounding the caudal neck and finding the nuchal ligament lamella in those horses. And in that process, the lass has just completed her master's, a Czechoslovakian lass, at a university in the Netherlands. Her master's was on the Caspian pony, and she found the nuchal ligament lamella in 100% of the Caspian ponies at a stud.
Wow.
Amazing.
So the ultrasound, so we can work out via ultrasound whether they have the nuchal ligament lamella or not on C6 and C7. And that was very exciting research, because you find a methodology and you watch people, it becomes repeatable. And then you can start to save these breeds that have it.
Yeah.
And then possibly, if you choose, bring that into the breeding programs.
Your belief is that going down that path of reintroduction or pushing for that C6, C7 lamella connection is better for the horses long term?
I do.
Yep.
Even though I haven't seen enough medieval horses, I was quite surprised on a medieval horse at the age of 22 who had arthritis riddled throughout her body through work. I was able to determine that she'd been ridden, had been in harness, and that she was a mill horse doing circles. Left and right.
Pelvic rotation or something?
No, actually, it's the accessory gluteal attachment to the femoral head is indicative of moving and driving in one direction.
Sort of like the racehorses.
Exactly, yeah.
Sort of similar, just a smaller circle.
A much smaller circle, and much more indicative of the attachment changing and becoming osseous. The thing about this mare, her changes in the body associated with those loads, repetitive strain, were very obvious. The ironical thing about it was she had less caudal cervical osteoarthritis, but we were able to ascertain that her enthesis patterns identified she had a full nuchal ligament lamella.
Wow.
I was very excited about that, because she was a mare breeding as well.
Yeah.
So she was doing it all.
Yeah.
And that comes back to what you talked about, this longevity. She was 22. I suspect she died in birthing.
Yeah.
Because there was a foal underneath her.
Yeah.
And I could tell by the pelvis that she'd been birthing because of the stretch over the pubic symphysis. Yeah. So it was possibly a birthing issue.
Yeah. That's actually also interesting. It just reminded me of something, because I was talking with someone that had also looked at a lot of bones in horses, and looking at the differences of a riding horse with all that caudal neck trauma over time, or horses that were started much later, like started to be ridden after the age of like 10, that didn't seem to have necessarily those problems so much. And in how I grew up in Europe, the old farmers, the traditional way of actually like starting horses, working with horses, was not to start them before the age of 5. And when they were started, they would be put into harness first, and then actually be worked in harness for a number, like sometimes like 2 years, and then after that being ridden. So that puts the horse another 2 years into maturing, which basically means it's sort of a mature horse, and then start to be brought on the saddle. That was quite common to do. And this lady said that there was a lot less damage. Have you had a look at any of the horses in draft horses? And
no,
as in like horses that are only used for carriage, I mean, and not being ridden?
No, I've been always seen them in both.
Yeah.
So they've done both. They've been in carriage and or being ridden.
And not necessarily started just in the
in harness and stayed in harness. Aside from standard breeds, but usually the
different
standard
story.
breeds. Yes, exactly.
Different story.
And it's a repetitive strain in an excessive range of motion.
I was going to say, and also, the way that we are like making these horses pace when they're not by nature designed to do so. They're no longer, in my personal experience, they're not very much capable of carrying a rider after a harness career that much. It's very difficult.
True. It's hard to bring them back.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Yeah, very, very difficult. That doesn't.
Their nature.
It's a beautiful nature. Yeah, the standard breds in Australia, I think they have an amazing nature. Like often, but they're particularly when they've been paced, it's very difficult to create soundness. But I think on that part of it, is it that important? Like I like to ride horses, but I would not want to compromise the health of my horse just because I need to sit on the back. And I think that also for you, also what you work with, or what most professionals in horses work with, is work with people that just want to spend their time really well with horses. It's just a concept that we need to do this training, or when you're talking about referring to it to extreme sports, which no matter how you look at it, a top athlete is under extreme stress. It will burn out or break down at some point. There's no longevity in it. But in the training in itself, we can also just have a very good time being next to our horses, or preparing the horse to actually ride it. Or even if you have a compromised horse, say that these horses are broken down, or have these issues in the hocks or stifles or through their back, have caudal neck arthritis. It doesn't mean that you can't ride it, but you might not be able to ride it that much.
Yes,
and
right.
you might have to spend 90% of the time on the ground, having an amazing time doing work that will build up the frame, and without that pressure on it, still have an amazing, enjoyable time with the horse. Even if you would like to do a dressage test, because for me, in my experience, to go and do an advanced test, how heavy really is it on the body of the horse? It's just because the whole training from the start to get there has been a little bit offset and out of balance, so everything's compressed and compromised, and therefore it becomes heavy strain. In reality, it's just so many minutes. We were talking before about LC with this story of a horse in, I think, 38 or 39. The horse was in battle, riding to that battle. The horse was obviously started in a different way, different time, maybe a different shape of horse, but that horse wasn't put in the horse float to go to that battle.
And that's the thing, a different shape of horse, because back then the anatomy of the horse was different to the modern and ancient
100%.
breeds now.
Yeah.
So
I very much agree on that. A horse's shape.
So the anatomy is different.
They're typically getting bigger horses though as well, aren't they?
Well, we've worked out that it's very likely that the nuclear lamella was lost in the last 100 or so years.
Yeah, right.
Not prior to that point. So it's been started to be reduced, or its reduction has primarily occurred after World War I, and then World War II. It became a huge reduction and more stabilised between C2 to C6, and then it became more obvious to go from C2 to C5 from late last century, and now it's consistent in the majority of modern and ancient horses as C2 to C5. There's been a dramatic shift in the last 40 years.
And I guess with modern technologies, internet, worldwide webs and so forth, awareness and education starting to kind of really be accessible to the people. This change that we're pushing for, where awareness and where people can make informed decisions about their training practices, their breeding, their all these things. It's to us, it's kind of a making it available, getting the right messages out there. Equipment, like over the last few days, you've spoken about saddle fit, you've spoken about bridles and bits and all these things and how they all interrelate. I guess it's where do you see how does this progress? How how do we create this knowledge and get that out there?
One of the things we had to establish that was there a problem.
Yeah, create the problem.
Yeah, you have to recognise that there's a problem initially.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, for the years and years I've been dissecting, people were asking me, well, it says here that the nuchal ligament lamella is from C2 to C7. How many times do you see that, Sharon? Well, invariably never. And so originally the research began with identifying that there was a problem, that there had been a reduction.
Yeah.
But then the research continued into another area, which was management. And then if we have lost it, and we're going to possibly have an increase in cervical caudal osteoarthritis, then what do we do to stabilise these horses so that they do have the longevity that we want them to have, and that partnership that we do desperately want with horses at various levels in our lives? So the variable feeding positions came in as an idea in regards to horses that were fixated through stabilisation. In other words, meaning they were stabilised, and not stabilisation as in how they were presented and stabilised due just to training, but because we put them in a stable. And so from that perspective, we're actually fixating some of their patterns. And so that was one of the areas that I was very concerned about. Needed to recruit muscles. There's more ways to recruit muscles. Unfortunately, time-poor people will be trying to recruit muscles in a riding horse only 40 minutes a day when they're riding them.
Yeah, sure.
And what's happening to the other 20?
To sit on a horse.
Yeah, and you need to condition them slowly and progressively. They have aerobic and anaerobic muscles. You need to condition them under different circumstances. And so variable feeding positions was born out of a number of factors. One, there was a reduction in the nuchal ligament lamella, which potentially made the caudal cervical vertebra susceptible due to hypermobility, due to the lack of stabilisation through the nuchal ligament lamella supporting the structures. Then we had to then consider how we were going to recruit the musculature. Variable feeding positions offered a horse postural changes according to where we put the positioning of the hay net. So browsing is only something from above the knees.
Yeah, that's important, right?
Yeah,
because a lot of people also
think it's always hay
misunderstand that.
high.
Yeah, but also think that browsing is like something that has to be really high up. But
It's only above the knee.
Above the knee. Yeah, it's not,
I
not
think
that
that's
difficult.
both of you in the past have spoken to me about the more and more we can keep them in a natural kind of
Absolutely.
context. Yeah, like it's hard in our domesticated, 5, 10, 20 acres.
And time-poor environment.
Yeah.
Look how smart you are. You make laneways.
Yeah, but
Even on a small property, you can
Do you
manage.
remember
What I
what?
mean with that is you can actually create on a small property
I'm
the
sure that's
management
going to
for
be
horses.
Edited. Have you met my wife?
Have you?
Exactly.
But again, it is a part of owning horses. It's not, that is something we discuss all the time. Is for us the ability for Australians, it's more so Australians, maybe Americans as well, to just go and buy a horse, just go and get a off the tracker and just kind of stick it in the paddock.
Conveyor belt horses.
Yeah, well, that's part of our problem is that it's
truly.
too readily available and too accessible. And it's too easy for us to just go and buy a horse.
Yeah.
The reality is that there is so many layers of awareness and education that people should have before they're even allowed to own a horse. We treat it as it's a right. We should just be able to go and buy a horse. And it's like, well, the basic first aid, the basic care, the basic husbandry, the basic, these are all qualifications that people go and, but we just wing it and we make things up, or we just kind of.
A bit like having children, really. You don't really need any marker for that either.
But in the racing industry, you have to be a qualified trainer before you're allowed to train a racehorse. So if you own a horse, there's got to be a duty of care.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, there's got to be a duty of care if you're looking after animals in an environment such as, the rescue animals.
Yeah, sure.
So people are trained for rescue animals, but they're not trained to be horse owners.
General owners,
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
I'm not saying they have to sit down and do a 1-year course full time. I'm suggesting that they consider that these factors are important, that they need to know.
Yeah.
That feeding high sugar diets could lead to insulin resistance or potential laminitic ponies. Other areas like that, I heard that one too. Other areas of concern. Owners are reliant upon other professionals to help guide them. And sometimes maybe what's professional and required for one horse isn't going to work for the other individual, which is where we come to all this individuality.
Absolutely.
And recognition of the individuality in the horse and how we can train it. So one horse you train one way may not apply to the next one.
Yeah. And even in keeping it, because I think
Exactly,
that's a very
some things.
important point for people like that you want to reach out to is as well, is that, you know, we have such a variety. We're talking about the ideal concept that we would breed a horse that would be, you know, structurally sound, so we can start on that. But the fact is that
physically sound, isn't it?
but like, you know, like that is actually sound to begin with, that has these lamella attached, that is like already has a better start to, you know, to have a better life. But what about all of these horses that are, you know, 18 hands warm bloods, that don't have those connections, that are hypermobile? It's not the same thing. They can't just live on a hill and be sent out in the bush, because they'll die. Like, you know, that's a whole different idea of keeping horses. So to educate yourself in how to keep horses and really take the time to understand the differences, learn about biomechanics, and learn what correct framing is.
But that's exactly what I was about to say, is training the eye to actually see these things. A lot of the
learning
time,
about nutrition.
you know, like I'll give you an example. I saw a video, someone was sharing a video of a horse being sent to a competition. I think it was like something like thoroughbred race horses being sent to do some kind of competition of some sort, and the girl proudly showing a video of a horse she's received, and it's lame. It's lame in the front end, it's lame in the back end, it's just lame. And it's like, well, you know, then you see 20, 30 comments about how wonderful it looks.
That it can carry the saddle now without bucking.
Yeah, and it's like it can't carry its legs and not swing, you know.
Yeah.
To recognize lameness.
Again, but they don't see it.
And it's not always easy to train the eye, because just some people don't have that eye. They've got to rely on other people to help them and get to that point where they can make that difference. I found an interesting question recently, and they said, my horse is choppy in front when he's trotting along a hard surface. And I was wondering, is that a problem? Well, if it's trotting choppy in front on a hard surface, but sound on a grass surface, so yeah, you potentially have a problem, because you've got a horse that's giving you two different biomechanical actions on two different surfaces. Maybe you have to consider that's, you know, got something wrong with its feet or something wrong with its joints somewhere. But that was the question. You know, is there a problem? I've been told by others it's not.
Because it becomes normal. And that's something that, again, we just got to get this message out there that, you know, they should move in an ideal, perfect world. These horses should move perfectly.
They do in the wild,
left or right.
And of course it's a pony, and it's a pony that's heading into that area of age where it can not only be arthritic, but it also can be a bit laminitic. It's one of those little, you know, those little.
But there's so many things that we can do in a positive frame of mind. I think there's so many things that we can give that people can search for to help their horses have a better life, and to make like conscious, you know, decisions on how to improve, and in that way, you know, still have a very happy marriage with their horses. I think that's important, because, you know, everybody is in it for the love of the animal. They are attached to their horses, and just because, but perhaps not in that extreme professional world, but the horses that we meet like every day that you see, it's the exception. How many people we know actually go to the Olympics? The thought might be there, but, you know, it's not always actually the dream is there, because that is a dream that's been pictured in front of you from a little girl, that you think like, oh, that would be, oh, Valhalla. Like, you know, but in reality, most people don't get into horses for that, particularly at a later age. The biggest horse community in the world is, you know, people that are over middle age, and that just want to.
Predominantly female.
Absolutely. Oh, and why do they get into horses?
They're traumatized.
they get into horses.
Sorry, I behaved myself.
They get into horses because they are looking for a place where they can actually have time to relax and ground themselves and be in nature and be with an animal that's that big, but that will be with them without any expectations. It's just the horse world, the equine world, that puts all of these pressures on people, that they have to achieve something, and they have to have a horse that needs to walk, trot, and canter within a week after starting it as a riding horse, and all of these things. And then the pressure is just there for that accomplishment. But in reality, that's just because there's not enough knowledge on, you know.
Yeah, the demographics shifted in the mid-1900s, where it's predominantly a male riding industry, where by the end of the 1900s, it was 10-1 female to male riders.
Because it's hobby.
And it's become, we got the hobby component, but now it's become more serious at a competitive level for female riders.
Still a hobby.
At Olympic level, no.
But I mean, it's still a hobby. Like,
for-
as in, you still started because of a wish to connect with the animal. The people that come into
from
those
that
Olympics
perspective,
are still
yeah.
just starting the horses, the riding of horses. They excel at something. They get the
Yeah.
drive, the competitive nature of human
I couldn't
beings.
say that with my clients, to some of those people I associate with. They've been there from day dot. They've got that competitive mind, and they've been involved with horses for whatever reason.
And want to get to the highest level.
Yeah. So one of our Olympic female riders, she represented Western in America before she went into eventing.
Yeah.
So she had that from day dot. It was there.
Absolutely.
And that's what it was like for me. It was there. I had to be with horses and had to be on their back.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I did it because I wanted that association, and so did this other lady. But the demographic shift was that since 1972, that all individual, there's only been one individual gold medalist at the Olympics was male.
Mm.
It's all been females.
Mm.
And we seem to want to emulate what we can see. And we've got a lot of female riders that are now at the Olympics. We have female Olympians on the medal bias in all equestrian disciplines. And that's quite beautiful and profound to me, because I believe that with the demographic change, we're possibly going to have a mindset shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where I think we can actually,
Yeah.
I'm not having a race gender issue here right now. I'm just thinking we have a different shift of consciousness.
100%. I mean, I was in that place myself. I was
Yeah.
brought up on the start. Like my parents were from competitive background. I
Yeah.
was trained to go to the Olympics. That was what we were going to do. I stepped away from that because at the time in the Dutch equipe, I was trained with the Olympic coach in the Rollcure method. That made me step away from the competitive riding at that time. I just made a shift because I didn't want that at that time, only just because coming from a horse environment, I could feel the pain in the horses. And that was the difference.
That's the conscious shift.
Yeah.
That's possibly the difference.
But again, that's why you're my mentor here. Again, so like there are different motivations and there are different reasons why people come to the horses, and I guess it also, you know, whether it is for the highest levels and the gold medals, or whether it's just to have that trail ride, you know, just a trail ride and just go for a ride. To us, those are things that personal drive, that's really irrelevant. But I guess what we all spoken about in the past is doing it in a sustainable manner that doesn't cause detriment physically or mentally to the horse. Those are things that, you know, that's awareness, that's education, that's being able to see and feel these things.
Yeah. And that's where you start to make the shift. So we've got Olympic riders asking why one of our other Olympic riders are now feeding their horses up a hill.
Perfect, yeah.
It's a slow domino principle.
And leading by example, yeah.
Yeah, and we're leading by example at that elite level, and by the fact that these horses that are winning, they're wanting to know how we're getting to that point with consistency in the number of horses we're putting up to elite level, and our paddocks are set up for browsing.
Yeah.
So we've got grazing and browsing and variable feeding positions in each paddock, and we're doing quite well with the primitive method.
Yeah.
But I learnt that of the primitives.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
observing
That is why, because you observed it,
I sat down
and so
I
you
watched
can
them
actually
before I dissected.
reproduce it. Yeah.
And so that's making a significant difference. So with that in mind, I'm very fortunate to be working still in one stable where these people are of that mindset. And it is becoming the domino principle, and it's going out through their students, throughout their clients, and it's going at the elite level. So eventually it will change, and it's happening in Germany, and it's happening in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
So it's
And
just
also from the riders, like I've had, I have riders that are like 3-4 star eventers that come with a broken down horse, and these are females. They are wanting to have a look at
they're wanting the
alternative instead of actually, because there is a personal attachment to that winning horse. They will come and have a look to see what can be done to make them at least more comfortable. And at that point, there starts like a rehabilitation, and these horses can still become fully functional with the right environment and the right training approaches.
So that's, I mean, to us, one of those things. My training goal, or my training philosophy there, and it comes from, you know, you've met Jeff Sanders. He spoke in the past of how, you know, the Vaquero tradition was that you couldn't see where the horse finished and the human started. They operated as one, and that notion of true unity. So whatever it is I do, and whatever it is, you know, whether it's competitive or just about riding, whatever, it would be that one day someone could say, "Hey, Andrew, I can't see what you did," and
I think that's beautiful.
that to me is, that's a philosophy that I take with me, and everything I do with them is I want to do less, I want to be quieter, I want to be smoother, and eventually be where we operated as one.
Yeah.
That takes some time.
It's like watching a noisy rider, isn't it? They're not saying anything coming out verbally, but they're noisy all over the horse.
Bingo, 100%. That's what I said. A lot of people in training is, we as people handling horses, we're yelling at the horse
all the time. Not only on the horse, also off the horse.
Bingo, yeah. It's loud and mostly obnoxious to the horse. It's aggressive.
It's a beautiful right to get that, fine detail right in the animal communication. And it gives you also a really great guideline to knowing when your horse start getting a little bit sore from one thing or another, or something's wrong with it, because you can read and communicate with the animal.
Well, you listen to the ones riding around the arena or wherever, and you listen to the ones on the table, and I guess that's where marrying those worlds and saying, hey, what we're doing isn't working. What we're doing as it currently stands is not working.
See, I transpose. So when I was in practice, I transposed from the table to the living horse, and that's where we made significant differences. When I talk about horses that we got off the knacker track, not only saved but got them to world class level and Olympic level. And that is making the difference to horses and people to think we don't have to have them on the conveyor belt, and we don't have to have them in the knackers truck going off to the knackers. There is possibility for all of these horses at various levels. We just have to stop and listen.
Yes. Exactly, and go a little bit back into researching what is the right approach, what's the right conformation, what's the right keeping of the horse. Because one of the things that these Middle Ages, that these horses were so much older, they were worth a lot of money at the time too. They weren't educated until they were 12 years old.
Yeah.
So they were valuable.
And that worries me. They're getting horses to Grand Prix by 9.
Yeah. It's not possible.
It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
Yeah. Not possible to do that without hurting the animal.
That's
right. Detriment of the horse, correct.
It takes too long for the body to condition that process. And that's where I started from, coming from a writing perspective, going through the sciences and publishing and carrying on like a pork chop, just by the fact, because it's crucial that we get it right.
Yeah.
Because the mistakes are on my table, and I don't want any more on my table or on the stand.
Yeah.
I don't want that. I don't want to see these horses until they're in their 20s.
Yeah.
I'm seeing too many below the age of 10.
Yeah.
And that's hard, because that's not how I thought as a child, because I just wanted to love them and be with them and rehabilitate them and make that difference. Give them longevity, give them quality of life, ride them if they wanted to be ridden, not ride them if they didn't want to be ridden, lead them, take them for bushwalks, but with me leading them. That's how I worked with my horses, because they told me today's not the day. All right, do you want to go for a walk? Here, we'll go for a walk.
Yeah.
I love that in hand walk with them.
I think you were talking about it yesterday, where you were saying, you didn't see your life being this way. You didn't see yourself being...
I didn't picture it. I didn't picture this at all.
How did you see it?
I thought I was going to be a vet.
Yeah.
Because I thought I could make a difference as a veterinarian to their quality of life. I realised I couldn't put them down.
Yeah.
And I realised I didn't have the strength of character to put them down at the right time. I'd still be trying to save them with that minuscule of hope that I'd hoped I could play out a miracle. I realised I didn't have that ability. So I switched to the sciences. Well, I was actually on the path to going from science into veterinary science, but I continued down the sciences path based on the fact that there were so many variations that we weren't exploring, so many conditions that were an issue. And I discovered ECVM in 99, right when I was about to switch into vet.
Yeah, right.
And then there was just too many issues arising from that. So my first science degree could lead me into vet science. And I went, well, we have to sort this out. And that actually sorted me out, because I got my first death threat in a few years.
It's been a journey.
I think so.
But again, and that's partly why we love you both, is that your heart and your, Maike and our AMT vision or motivation why we do things is, to make the world a better place for the animals, to make the world a better place for these horses. And that's partly why we resonate with both of you so much, is that, again, whether you don't say it openly, but again, your actions say that you do this for the horse.
Our actions speak louder than our words.
They do, 100%. And that's something to us that, when with that love and with that openness, willingness, the desire to put the horse first, you know, we might find a better way. Yeah?
Mm.
That's our hope anyway.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right, might take this opportunity to wrap things up. Thank you both
Thank
so
you for
much,
asking me to.
and thank you
Yeah,
for coming
yeah,
out.
yeah.
And like, we were meant to do this last year with COVID, and
Yeah.
next time we might even get Belinda with her family and bring the kids over and whatnot.
That was supposed to happen, didn't actually go through because of
Yeah,
COVID as well.
COVID again. The world as we know it has changed.
Supposed to be here in the van with all the children around me. I had to bring my herd.
It'd be a lot
Can
of
you
fun.
imagine Jackson?
Oh, Jackson be in heaven.
Yeah, you would have been in heaven.
But yes, thank you both, and
Thank you.
let's keep being, I guess, ambassadors for the horse and
Yeah.
lead by example.
Yes.
I think that's well said.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Okay.